And our next speaker is very well known from the audience, is Juan Manuel Granados Rojas, a Colombian Jesuit who graduated at the Pontifical Biblical Institute in 2008. He is currently Associate Professor of New Testament Exegesis at the Biblicum, and his field of expertise is the letters of Paul. The title of his short paper is Paul, an Anomalous Pharisee, Some Remarks on Philippians 3:5. I have said short paper, because he will speak 10 minutes less than usual. He has asked for this discount, and we have accepted. Yeah, so we also thank him. Yeah. Juan Manuel.
Thank you, Nuria. Acknowledgement, especially Joseph Siebert, thank you for the invitation. Father Victor Cancino, thank you for the translation. Padre Cancino prepared the English version. I published already that in Revista Argentina. So I'm presenting you a summary of my research. Well, issues at stake. Was Paul a Pharisee? That's a good question, because in the letter to the Philippians, we have a direct testimony saying, yes, I was a Pharisee according to the law, as to the nomos. However, there are some scholars that think otherwise. Okay, we have Overman. To strengthen his reputation, Paul should be able to demonstrate his association with the Pharisees or with Pharisaism. However, this is Overman's position, such association does not mean that he was a Pharisee sensu stricto. So we have the first opposition. Don Antonio Pita, Italian scholar, has answered this challenge, and he considers, for example, that Philippians 3:2-14 and Galatians 1:13-17, they are parallel texts. From their comparison, several common themes are evident between Pharisaic Judaism and the ancient sources. Among these themes should be mentioned the global character of the written law and the oral law, the importance of tradition and worship, the primacy of Israel election, the relationship between faith and personal responsibility, the final resurrection and food restriction for reasons of purity. All these thematic points of contact are numerous and of different category. As a result, the insinuation of Overman is questioned. So, not everybody agree with Overman. Second objection, coming from Maccoby. Maccoby says, Paul was a Gentile Greek, not a Jew. So the anti-Jewish elements introduced in the Christian scriptures cannot be attributed to Jesus, but to Paul. It's clear. Following or along with Neusner, Dunn, for example, considers that there are three sources that allows us access to understanding the nature of the Pharisees and the Pharisaism in the first century. These include the Gospel, Josephus, and Paul. In the testimonies available, only the last two claim to be a Pharisee or have received such training. Although the Pauline testimony could be considered adversative to the Pharisee identity, Dunn argues that in Galatians 1:13-14 and in Philippians, our text, Paul speaks in a credible manner of his pre-Christian past. So we have two positions against his Pharisaisms and the corresponding answers or responses. Here I'm quoting for my students, especially my students who need to prepare the next seminar, the bibliography. We can find the critical evaluation of this interpretation respectively in Bianchini and Pita. I just mentioned it on Antonio because I am present later Bianchini's position against Overman, and in Dunn and Barclay against Maccoby. Continuing with the issues at stake, the question is, was Paul a Pharisee? Well, some think that not. What are the sources? We have textual and non-textual sources. Speaking about the textual sources, that is my task here, the main source is Philippians. However, the question is Philippians 3:2-14 a reliable source? We have a friend in common, which is Angela Stanhardinger. It's a fine woman, and it's a fine scholar, a German scholar. But she thinks that Philippians is not a reliable source, at least this chapter. Angela, this is a quotation from her. By editing the letters to its present canonical form, the Philippian community actually became imitators of Paul. Paul's biography is his self-sustentancing in the sense of the imitatio Christi as dismissal of any kind of religious achievement, changed in the final text to the depiction of a religious hero whose exceptional personality and exhortation could lead onto the path to salvation. Main argumentation of Angela Stanhardinger is that at least Philippians 3 is a later edition of the text made by the Pauline school in the second century. And all her research is based on Philippians 3:17. So allow me to say that even though her publication is from 2008, before, at the beginning of 2000, Victoria Kopersky, among others, have proved that this compositional hypothesis applied on Philippians is unreliable. Second person that thinks that probably we don't have anything new about to Philippians. So the second question is, do we have something new in the recent studies of Philippians? Smith, in one of the most recent papers on Philippians, he claims that we don't have anything new. And he's saying, well, the more important thing in the last research, and he claimed that this is himself, is the practice of periautology to discover a Greek pattern in this chapter. And allow me to say that even in this case, his publication from 2014 ignores all the evidence we have from Pernot, from Manuel Aletti, and from Bianchini of their works beginning in the 2000s. So we have already some dissertation on periautology applied to this text. Some bibliography: Pernot, Periautology en français, Aletti, his commentary on Philippians, Bianchini, his doctoral dissertation, and the last articles, and Don Antonio Pita too. Following Pernot's study, Aletti was one of the first scholars to notice a self-praise pattern in Philippians 3:2-6. We call self-praise pattern, which is in the Greco-Roman rhetoric periautology, topos. Bianchini developed in his monograph Aletti's Insight. Both Aletti and Bianchini observed that the periautologia includes here not only verses 5-6, but also 7-11. So I'm going to show you what is the point. The first element we find in Paul's description is circumcised on the 8th day, a member of the people of Israel, a genus Israel, important the mention of genus here, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew born of Hebrews, as to the law, a Pharisee, our point, katanomon Pharisaeus, as to zeal, a persecutor of the church, katatzelos diokon ten ecclesian, as to the righteous under the law, blameless. What is the pattern of periautology, of self-praise? Here we see the first 4 characteristics corresponds to the genus, the origin of Paul in this case. And it's very important to notice that these characteristics, these merits, don't belong to him. I mean, he received that. The second is the paideia, or the training. As to the law, Pharisee. It corresponds to his particular training. And then we have their praxis. As to the sole persecutor of the church, and as to the righteousness under the law, blameless. This pattern here, genos, paideia, and praxis, is the rhetorical pattern of the periautology, as Pernod and other scholars have noticed. I mean, this is not new for us. The thing new for us is that this corresponds only to the example of Jesus, the Anomalous Pharisee. I want to explain why Anomalous Pharisee or Anomalous Jew too. This is just the first stage in Paul's reasoning. In between, what do we have? I claim we have an auxesis here. We call that an incrementum too. The self-price, as we propose here to show immediately, works as a holistic discourse or an argument in which the exemplum is compared with a second example. This comparison between exempla we call syncresis. So the periautology and the auxesis are articulated, or the auxesis articulates two different examples. We have two examples, one of the Paul Pharisee, the second one of the Christian Paul. The syncresis is the comparison between these two. And then we have the periautology in the first panel, overstep or change in the second panel, and then in between we have an incrementum. The first example is Paul. I call that an anomalous Pharisee, and I will explain why I'm using this category. And this description in 3:2-6, as we have already read, indicates a value system and the merits that Paul has in sarki. Okay, that's very important for us. The composition of this passage contains two examples, that of the Jewish Paul as Pharisee and that of the Christian Paul, the second one. The progression of the passage shows, on the other hand, two articulated comparisons, a comparison between two examples and a comparison between two value systems. That's my point. It's very modest, but it's, no one of the previous scholars have noticed that we don't have only here two different examples, two different persons in one. No. At the stake, we have here two different value systems. One is in sarki, and the second system is in Cristo Jesús. And in between, we have an auxesis, an incrementum. The second overpass the first one. The progression is also outlining in terms of an incrementum. The system of value in Christ encompasses and surpasses the system of merit in the flesh. Now, understanding the incrementum. The comparison between the Jewish Paul, I call that Anomalous Pharisee, and Paul, the disciple of Christ, as well as the comparison between their corresponding value systems in the flesh or in Jesus Christ, shows an incrementum or an auxesis, a rhetorical technique. This movement to surpass values or motives in order to be boastful. The system of value is very important, is what we call kauhaomai. And Yahweh, for example, has a beautiful work on that, explaining us the system of value in which one person can boast. The system of honor is very important in the ancient times. This movement to surpass values or motives in order to be boastful of other values can only be understood in Philippians 3:2-16 by means of the detachment of the I, and from the I we pass to the mind. That is understood and in the topos of Greco-Roman self-price periautology. So this pass from here, from I and from mine, is very important, this detachment. Otherwise, you can change the system of value. of the value system. The Jewish Paul, the Pharisee, is depicted as an anomalous Jew. Why? What is the anomaly? There is an incrementum between the Jewish Paul and the Paul in Christ. What kind of incrementum? Or what kind of anomaly? I took the expression from John Barclay's studies. Paul's anomaly, he defines, consists precisely in his critical attitude towards pagan culture and his radical redefinition of traditional Jewish categories. That's what I'm calling an anomalous Pharisee. And following Barclay, we have also Michael Beard, and this is a very recent publication. So that's the reason I took the argument too, because I prepared a review of Michael Beard, which is a fine book, a little bit unarticulated, but he took the category and explained the anomaly. Paul's reference to the law of Christ, the new creation, and the Israel of God indicates continuity with his Jewish heritage. In all these elements, the anomaly, the discontinuity, is seen in the role of the law. Paul's use of the scriptural narratives and the deployment of an apocalyptic worldview show him clearly embedded with a Jewish framework. But unlike other Jewish thinkers and other apocalyptic seers, Paul makes the law preparatory to salvation rather than necessary for salvation. End of the quote. This is Michael Beard. I don't know how I am at the time, but this is the conclusion. Okay. The development of the argument in Philippians 3:2-6 makes sense when its rhetorical articulation is understood. This doesn't simply describe the innate characteristics, origin, or acquired merits, training, and performance of the Jewish Paul. This is very important because Smith, for example, claims that the periautology ends there with the description of the three main characteristics or the main areas. But it leads to the transformation of the motives for any believer to be boastful, to kauhaomai, to have an honor in front of others. Paul presents himself as an was an example of this transformation. While his self-praise was at the limit of what is admissible, the apostle appeals to this topos, the periautologia of the Greco-Roman rhetoric, to apparently still present within the Christian community, to demarcate two sets of conflicting value systems, two models of glorifying or glorying, apparently still present within the Christian community. One value system characterized by the confidence in the flesh, the other set of values defined by the boasting in Christ Jesus. The comparison syncresis allows him to demarcate these two systems of value, to have confidence in the flesh and that of boasting in Christ. The incrementum, the auxesis, allows him instead to demonstrate the inferiority of a system subject to the I, the Jewish Paul, as opposite to the superiority of another system shared by Paul and the we. Thank you very much for your attention.